Well, good morning, Radiant Church. Hey, if you got your Bible, and I hope you do, I want you to turn with me to the book of Ruth. Ruth chapter 2 is where we're going to be. It's the 8th book in the Old Testament. And so you can go there or just look in the table of contents. As you're turning there, let me just say welcome. If you're a guest with us this morning, thanks so much for being here. Man, thanks so much for giving up your Sunday morning. I know there's a lot of places you could be, a lot of things you could be doing, but you chose to come and worship with us. And so if you'll look maybe just under your feet to your right or to your left, you should find one of these. We just call these a Connect card. And if sometime during the service, if you could fill that out, give us a little bit of information on who you are. We would love to connect with you and tell you more about how you can belong, grow, serve here at Radiant Church. And so you could take those and put them in the black boxes as you leave. One will be at the exit door. The other will be at the Connect table there. And that's your gift to us this morning. So we would love to just be able to connect and share a little bit more about who we are and get to know you a little bit. And then the other thing I just want to mention real quick before we jump in is we are putting on, in the month of July, a soccer camp, a free soccer camp, Berry Park for the community. And we are extremely excited about this. I just announced this to you guys a couple of weeks ago, and then we put it out on Facebook. As of right now, unless somebody has just signed up, I think we have 60 kids who have signed up at this point. So we're really excited about that. But here's what we need. That's incredible news, but we're gonna need some help. We have a team that's coming up to help us put on the soccer camp, but we need so many of you to help. Whether you like, I don't do soccer, that's okay, I don't either, and I'm gonna be out there making a fool of myself. And so come, serve. There may be, like, we'll have cotton candy, snow cones out there as well. And so we would love for you to come and be a part. Just a way for us to say, hey, we love this community. We want to do whatever we can to engage this community. And so we're so happy. So July 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th, I need you to put that on your calendar. If you're in this room, unless you're from out of town, you have plans that particular day. All right, those nights from 6 to 8, you're there. And so on the Connect table, you can also pick up just some inviter cards. So if there's some families that you're like, man, they might want to come and be a part of this. I need you to do it quickly, though, because we've had so many sign up. We're probably going to have to cut off the amount of kids that we can actually have so that we're not just doing controlled chaos. We're actually teaching them some soccer. So have them sign up as quickly as they possibly can. So pick these up at the Connect table on your way out and give those to families and say, hey, you need to sign up really, really, really quickly because we're really excited about soccer camp for the month of July. Okay, the book of Ruth. I hope you're there by now. Let me catch you up just in case this may be your first week or you've forgotten since a little bit last week. We have just been making our way through this incredible story, looking at the different characters that Ruth shares with us. And in chapter 1, we kind of were introduced to one particular family. Elimelech, Naomi, and their kids, and then their boys had wives. And so all of chapter 1 was about this one particular family and their disobedience from leaving Bethlehem and going to Moab. And then last week, we were finally introduced to another character, Boaz. And we learned that Ruth and Naomi, they had returned back to Bethlehem, and they interacted with this guy named Boaz, who we're going to learn more about this morning. But we also learned about Boaz that he's actually in the family of Elimelech. He's in the clan there. And then we learned last week that Ruth, as she was going out into the fields, she was doing this thing called gleaning, and we learned that it just so happened, right? And we talked about it wasn't just a coincidence that she was in Boaz's field. It was on purpose that she was actually there, and she was gleaning in his field. And we talked about last week that gleaning was this process that God has set up to really care for the fatherless, the widows, the orphans, the sojourners. It was put into place. So as you were going about, if you owned some land and you were going about harvesting that field, the law says that you don't harvest all of it. In fact, if you miss some, you don't go back and get it. You actually leave it there for the gleaners, to come back. And actually, it's a way for the community, and it's a way for God to provide for those. Well, Ruth was one of those gleaners. And Boaz, he notices this new girl in town. Not in a romantic way, nothing like that, but in just the reputation of Ruth had preceded her. People had started to talk, not only because she's the girl from out of town, but because of the way that she treated people, the way that she had interacted with people, the way that she loved Yahweh. And so he has heard about her. And we read in verse 13, the very last verse from last week in Ruth chapter 2, it says, Ruth says this, "My Lord, I found favor with you, for you have comforted and encouraged your servant, although I'm not like one of your female servants." Ruth, we talked about this last week, but Ruth doesn't say, finally, it's about time somebody took notice of me. It's about time that like I've been praying, I've been having, like the posture with which Ruth continues to portray herself is of compassion and grace and humility. And we talked about what that would be like last week if that was our posture, if that's how we approached the throne of grace. And so this morning, we're gonna pick it up as the story continues in verse 14. And this is what Ruth has to say. In mealtime, Boaz tells her, Ruth, "Hey, come over here and have some bread and dip it in the vinegar sauce." So she sat beside the harvesters and he offered her roasted grain. She ate and was satisfied and had some left over. Okay, so she's been out gleaning. She's been out in the field. She's been working, like she's exhausted. All of them are exhausted, and now we have mealtime. And he says, "Come on over." And at first glance, it might not seem like very much is happening in this one little verse, but really this is a big deal because meal times were a big deal. Like they were a huge, huge deal. Meal times were a time where celebration could happen. It was a time when a host could show hospitality to others around. It was a time where celebration would happen. It was a time when you could like elevate other people. You could honor other people. It was a time when certain like even deals like would happen. Like you would come and be like, "Hey, what about this?" Like you could do business deals there at the mealtime. You know, we're so used to a culture in which, how much time do we have? We got 20 minutes. Okay, let's eat as quick as we can. Like that's ours. Like we're running from one place to the next. We're so quick. I mean, we have microwaves to help us out. We have Mickey D's to make it even easier. That's not what's going on here. They would have taken their time. This would have been, "Hey, let's take a break from the work and let's come and let's gather and sit and eat." And we learn a lot about Boaz. Like last week, we kind of just introduced to him a little bit. We're learning a little bit more, and you may go, "Well, what do we learn here?" There's three things that I want to pull out of what we learn about Boaz right here. The first is what kind of leader he is. We learn about him as a leader. Oftentimes, if you were the landowner or you were the boss, you don't associate with those who are working underneath you. You wouldn't. In fact, the only time that you might interact with them is when you have something to tell them, when you have some news or some instruction. Not Boaz. What we see in this story right here is Boaz, like he's actually there gathering, eating with his workers. And that in this meal, he actually goes above and beyond what's required of him, right? I mean, look, he tells Ruth, "Dip your bread in the vinegar sauce." Now that may sound a little bit weird to you and to me, right? This isn't like they're having chips and salsa. But this is what's going on here. This is why it's such a big deal. Bread in this day and age, I don't know about, maybe when you guys go to the store, maybe I'm gonna give you too much information, but when you go to the store and you like look at a loaf of bread or you're getting like hamburger buns, or do you like kind of smash the bag just a little bit to feel the softness of the bread? I'm not the only one who does that, right? Like you feel it and it's like, no, you put it back and then like you grab the other one, you're like, "This is my style." You know, and like that, we want like really soft bread, okay? That type of bread was non-existent in this day and age. Like you didn't get the soft bread. Bread was historically very, very dry. I don't want to use the word stale, but it would have been like, it was a little bit crunchy, you know? And so what they would do is they would actually dip the bread in the vinegar sauce to make the bread softer. But here's the thing. Only those who the vinegar sauce was made available to could actually do this. So what we're learning here is Boaz is saying to his crew, and especially to Ruth the Moabite, he's saying, "What I eat, you will eat. I'm not gonna have the choice food and give you the dry bread." He's looking at Ruth and saying, "I'm gonna give you exactly what I'm going to eat." It shows us what kind of leader he is. But it also shows us not only that he's a good leader, but that he's a leader that provides in abundance. He provides in abundance. Boaz is taking a normal, everyday life event, and he's showing his generosity, his compassion, his acceptance. As if to say to them and to us, it shouldn't take some special event to show generosity. It should be an everyday life choice that you're making. In everyday event, you should show compassion, generosity, and care for one another. This is what Boaz is saying. Don't wait for the special event. Don't wait till just a holiday. Don't wait till somebody's birthday to acknowledge them. No. You show generosity, care, compassion. You provide more than enough. The language here in this verse kind of sounds a little bit like there's a story in the New Testament where Jesus feeds the 5,000. And in Mark's gospel, he says this is what it says, all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces and of the fish. It's like there's an abundance. There's more than enough. He doesn't just lay it out and say, hey, just go get the scraps. More than enough. And then the third thing that I just think we can learn from Boaz right here is that he gives Ruth the seat of honor. The seat of honor. A Moabite eating with an Israelite did not happen. And he didn't just say, hey, I want you to come to the edge of the circle. He says, come and eat with all of my workers. Come on in. And he gives her the seat of honor. What he shows, and we talked about this like a few weeks ago, he's showing this idea of hesed, kindness, right? We said a few weeks ago that this word hesed in the Hebrew, our English language doesn't have a word to convey what this word hesed means. Like kindness doesn't do it justice. But he's going above and beyond. Here's the seat of honor. It's incredible what he's doing. And then we continue. Verse 15. So when she got up to gather the grain again, Boaz ordered his young men, let her even gather grain among the bundles, and don't humiliate her. Like pull some of the stalks from the bundles for her and leave them for her to gather. Don't rebuke her. So Ruth gathered the grain in the field until evening. She beat out what she had gathered, and it was about 26 quarts of barley. She picked up the grain, went into town where her mother-in-law had seen what she had gleaned. She brought out what she had left over from the meal and gave it to her. It seems like forever ago since we started off in Ruth chapter 2 where Ruth set out to find favor. To just find favor with somebody, right? She's the newbie in town. She went out to glean, to go in the fields just so somebody would look at her and show her favor. And it seems like forever. And she's found it more than she could have ever thought. And we learn that Boaz, like he's taking care of her, this hesed, this loving kindness. But let's pull back a little bit and shouldn't we note not just how Boaz is treating Ruth, but think about how Ruth is treating Naomi. Like think about that for a minute. Do you remember when Naomi came back into town? Right? The name Naomi, it means pleasant one. And what did she do? When she came back into town, she looked at the town and said, hey, don't call me Naomi any longer, call me Mara, which means bitter one. I've gone out full and I've returned empty. I don't know about you, but when you're around somebody who's bitter, they're not the easiest person to love. I mean, think about how Naomi, think about the conversations that they're just going to bed at night, they're just sitting there. Think about how much Naomi's probably complained. Think about how much negative energy she's had. Think about how angry she probably has been. Think about how selfish she's probably been. And Ruth continues to show her kindness, hesed, over and over and over again. She goes out to glean. Naomi stays home. Ruth brings home the leftovers and says, hey, why don't you dip the bread in the vinegar sauce? It's pretty incredible what Ruth is showing to us. But friends, this is exactly how Jesus treats us. Loving kindness. Even, and I'm sure this isn't anybody here, even when we're bitter, even when we're angry, even when we're selfish, even when we're out for number one, even when we don't think of other people. And I know that's none of us here. Even in those moments, the God of the universe looks at you and says, you're mine. This is how he treats us. In your worst, he's right there. I mean, Tim Keller says that you're more sinful than you could possibly realize, but you're more loved than you can ever fathom. I love it. King Jesus looks at us the same way. And it continues in verse 19. It says, her mother-in-law said to her, like, where did you gather barley today? Like, where did you work? May the Lord bless the man who noticed you. Ruth told the mother-in-law whom she had worked with and said, the name of the man I worked with today is Boaz. Like, anyone else kind of, you feel like Naomi's tone has changed a little bit here? Like, where did you gather the barley? Who did you work with? May the Lord bless him. Like, her tone just changes just a little bit here. And then verse 20, then Naomi said to the daughter-in-law, may the Lord bless him because he has not abandoned his kindness to the living or the dead. Naomi continued, the man is a close relative. He's one of our family redeemers. Ruth the Moabite said, he also told me to stay with my young men until they finished all of my harvest. So Naomi said to the daughter-in-law, Ruth, my daughter, it is good for you to work with his female servants so that nothing will happen to you in another field. So Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants and gathered grain until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with their mother-in-law. Okay. So last week, I said one of the things that happens in the book of Ruth is there's this split screen. And I use the example of like a sporting event. You can oftentimes be watching the game, but you can also, sometimes the screen will split and you can see what's also happening on the sidelines. Right? Or you can be watching golf and it can be showing two different people putting at the same time. It's simultaneously, this is happening, but you can see both. Now, the players, they can't. They're focused in on their stuff. And I said, this is kind of what is happening in the book of Ruth. Like there's a split screen where we get to see like Ruth's story and Naomi's story, but we also get to pull back and we get a bird's eye view into what God's story is doing. So I want to draw your attention to something that's happening in verse 20 because it could be easy to miss. Who is the him that Naomi is talking about? May the Lord bless him because he has not abandoned his kindness to the living or the dead. Like, whose kindness has not been abandoned? Because is it referring to Boaz or is it referring to Yahweh, God, Lord? And it's trying to be a little bit ambiguous. It's trying to be like a little bit like hard to tell because both have shown hesed, both have been generous, both have been faithful. So who is it that Naomi is referring to here? Is she still referring to Boaz or is she referring to the Lord here? And listen, like I read commentaries, I read authors and theologians who were going back and forth on which one. And I think I think she's talking about Boaz, whose actions towards Ruth have not only blessed Ruth in Naomi, but also Elimelech in Mahlon. Elimelech's Naomi's husband, Mahlon was Ruth's husband. They were killed earlier. So when it says, bless the living and the dead. But it's also clear that Naomi is blessing the Lord because he hasn't abandoned the kindness that he showed to her. He hasn't abandoned his hesed. So why does it matter? Here's the point. Even when Naomi didn't feel it, even when Naomi didn't think it, even when Naomi didn't understand it, God has still been kind to Naomi. Split screens. She doesn't always see it, but God is still here. Naomi's finally starting to understand that a little bit. Naomi's having one of those like aha moments where she's starting to see the faithfulness of God that's been there all along. And it's one of those like, you didn't ever leave me. You've been right here. It's as if the text is saying, even in a season of despair, even in a season of hopelessness, don't forget what the psalmist says. Weeping may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Weeping may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. You see, complete redemption for Naomi is going to come later on, but it's like she's having that little moment. Like sometimes for us, our understanding of what God has been doing, it's not like a one-time boom and we see it. It's like little by little, you start to see the hand of God that has been working the whole time. You just didn't see it. Maybe you were too close to the situation and you just couldn't quite get your arms wrapped around what's happening. That's what's happening in Naomi's life right now. She's starting to realize that God has been faithful, even when she didn't know it. And you gotta think, you've gotta think that Naomi, when she heard Ruth tell her the name of the man whose field she went and gleaned in, you gotta think that Naomi got a little giddy inside. You know, sometimes when you have information that other people don't have, sometimes I work with college students a lot, and so this happens a lot, like in dating relationships. I'll talk to one of the guys. This actually happened with a couple, and I'll talk to the guy, and he'll be like, I kind of have a crush on this girl. And I know that the girl also has a crush on him, but I have some insider information, but I don't share that with him. And then I'll talk to the girl and she'll kind of be like, man, I kind of have this crush on the guy that just told me that he had a crush on her. And I'm like, I know he has a crush. I have the insider information. That's kind of Naomi at this point. She has some insider information, right? That it just so happened that Ruth went to glean in the fields of Boaz. It's to draw our attention to the fact that Boaz is one of the few men that can actually help him out. So you got to know, Naomi's a little bit giddy. Naomi's going, are you kidding me? Boaz, that Boaz, there can't be more than one Boaz. No parent would do that to their kid. Boaz, that's the one? Yes, I know him. I know him. He's one of the ones that can help us. But did you see what the text said? The text said he is one of our family redeemers, meaning he's not the only one. He's not the only one. There could at least be 1, 2, 3, maybe a handful of other family redeemers, or your translation may say kinsmen redeemers, that could help them out, which we'll get to in the next chapter. But for now, what I want to do with the rest of my time is I want to talk about this idea of family redeemer, of kinsman redeemer. What does it mean? Why is this such a big catalytic moment in this book? Why is it so important? Okay, here's why it's important. Last week we talked about the idea of gleaning and how God had set this up to care for those who were less fortunate, to care for those who maybe have had some really bad situations happen in their life. He set gleaning up as if to say the law is not just a bunch of do's and don'ts. It's actually there to provide protection for God's people. You see, those people who are under the law, if you believe in Jesus, you don't see the law as a bunch of do's and don'ts. We see it as God's favor on our lives, his protection on our lives. That was gleaning. In the same way that God set up gleaning to provide for the orphans and widows and sojourners, he's also set up this idea of kinsman redeemer, family redeemer, in the exact same way. So what is it? Okay. In the book of Leviticus, it gives us, Leviticus is an Old Testament book. If you read the book of Leviticus, it's usually one of those books that you don't make it all the way through. You know, there's just so much what is this, huh? I don't understand it. But here's the beauty of Leviticus. If you can make your way through it, if you can get to there's some rich things that are happening. The idea of kinsman redeemer is one of those things that's happening. Okay, so the book of Leviticus, it gives us some ways in which a redeemer could protect and help his relatives. And there were multiple ways that this could play out. So, if someone had become poor, if someone has fallen on hard times, and the only way to get money is to sell their land, Leviticus tells us that a kinsman redeemer, a family redeemer, could come in and actually purchase that land back from the one who bought it from you and give it back to you. He had every right to do so, and the landowner that bought it from you can't say anything about it. He has to sell the land back to your kinsman redeemer. Or let's say that you fell on really hard times and you, which was very common in this day, would kind of voluntarily go into slavery. A family redeemer could actually purchase you back from the one that you sold yourself into slavery to and give you your freedom. A family redeemer could do all of this. It could also play itself out in marriage. So say a man marries a girl and the man passes. The brother of the man that passes was required by law to then marry the widow. And if they had kids, to raise the kids. If they didn't have kids and the brother and the widow had kids, they were to name one of the kids after the brother that had passed away to show honor to the brother. It was like a way to honor him. So it's like God has set this stuff in place that when things happen in life, a family redeemer, a kinsman redeemer could come and help you out. It wasn't as if you fall on hard times, it's like, sorry, you fell on hard times, there's nothing anyone can do about it, you're stuck. No. God ordained it to a family redeemer, a kinsman redeemer could come in and restore you. Boaz is one of these family redeemers for Ruth and Naomi. But here's the thing though. None of this, everything that I just talked about, slavery, selling your stuff off, marriage, none of those things actually pertain directly to Boaz. None of it. Naomi and Ruth weren't landowners. They didn't sell off some land. Naomi and Ruth weren't in slavery. Boaz wasn't even the brother of Naomi's two sons, nor was he the brother of Elimelech, Naomi's husband. So technically, Boaz is not required any way, shape, or form to be the family redeemer of Ruth. None of it. Yet, this is another way that the author is saying to you, the reader, and to us, pay attention to Boaz. Every time there's a loophole where Boaz could get out of whatever situation he's in, he has a loophole. He has a way out. Every time he chooses to continue to lean in. Every single time. He continues to show us how kind and gracious and generous he is. Over and over and over again. Remember the split screen. Ruth's story, God's story. And it's here that our author is forcing us to look at God's story. Through the character of Boaz, the author is saying Jesus is the better Boaz. Jesus is the greater Boaz. The author is saying the same redemption that Boaz is providing for Ruth has been provided for you by King Jesus. Over and over, he's pointing us back. In the Old Testament, still, it's pointing us to the better Boaz of Jesus. So what do we mean? What do we mean when we say redemption has been provided for you by Jesus? Or what do I mean by Jesus is your family redeemer? Or Jesus is your kinsman redeemer? Well, there's a lot that I could say, but I just want to highlight 5 things. 5 things that what we mean when we say Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. He's our family redeemer. Here's the first. That you are accepted and adopted into his family. That you are accepted and adopted. You see, family is a massive part, a huge part of God's story. All through it, we see family woven in and out of the story. By Jesus coming, it's you are accepted, you are adopted. Those who have placed their hope and trust in him are his children. You're accepted. The second thing is your debt has been paid. Your debt has been paid in full. You know that Christianity, the way to heaven, the way for salvation, Christianity is the only religion where that is received and not achieved. You ever thought about that? That every other religion says you got to achieve something. You got to do this, you got to do that. You got to somehow earn it. Christianity says it's already been done. It has already been done. Jesus' perfect life, Jesus' death on the cross, Jesus' shedding of his blood paid for a way for you to stand before the Father. And right now, he is pleading on your behalf. This is my son. This is my daughter. This is my child. This one has been adopted. For those who have placed their hope and trust, allegiance into King Jesus, he's there now. Your debt has been paid. which leads to the third thing that we mean, is that sin and death have been defeated. I mean, Seth said it earlier, but how beautiful is it that King Jesus defeated sin, that King Jesus defeated death. Death didn't get the final say. When the disciples, they went to the tomb was empty. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's alive. He isn't here. Sin and death have been defeated, which means that you have a path to the Father. You can have a relationship with God Almighty. Let me just do a little thought experiment for you. Is there a bigger information gap or knowledge gap between my 6-year-old and me, or between me and God Almighty? Like, it's pretty easy to answer, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I know that my 6-year-old doesn't. But there is a whole lot more that the Almighty God knows that I don't. So are we trying to make God fit into some box that we've created, or are we allowing him to be the one who gets to define our lives? Jesus gave you a pathway to him, that you can come to the Father in your most glorious moment or in your weakest moment, and you have access to him. Tell me what other religion says that. This is what it means to be redeemed. And then the last thing I'll just point out, what it means that Jesus is our kinsman redeemer, it means that the conquering king is gonna return. He's gonna return. And I don't know about you, but I long for that day. I get excited about that day when my maker, when the one that I long to be with, I finally get to be with. He's returning, he's coming back. He's our kinsman redeemer. He's our family redeemer. And for those who have placed their hope and trust and allegiance into him, you get to be with him forever. You get to be with him forever. See, the beauty of looking at a book like Ruth and getting to see Boaz like provide this for Ruth is his example for what Jesus has provided for us. What Jesus has provided for us. And so for those who stand and say, gosh, I want to do things on my own. Why? Why when he's right there beckoning you to come to him? So Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. Let's pray.